Here we go. All right, welcome everyone to our Wisconsin Music Ventures Industry Talks event. This one is featuring different podcasters from Wisconsin and beyond, and I'm really grateful to have four of them here. Actually, five, because we found another one along the way. So I'm really glad to have you all here, and actually, I guess there's six because we have our own too. So, but I won't. I would much rather have you all talk instead of me because that's more interesting. And I'll go ahead and let you get started. I think I'll start in order of appearance. That's usually how I work these things. So if you would just give me a couple minutes of, will you talk about what your podcast is, who you are, where you're from, and who your audience is? And I'll start with Jared.
Hi, Allison, and thanks so much for having me. My name is Jared Judge. I run the Gigging Musician podcast. I'm from Wisconsin, from Milwaukee, same town as Allison, and that's how we got connected. My target audience is gigging musicians. So my whole story is I went to music school twice, did the whole audition circuit because I really wanted to make it as a professional orchestra conductor, had these dreams of doing that full time. Of course, after getting rejected audition and audition again and being told that I got second place at one, that's kind of where I realized I needed to start creating my own opportunities so that I could feel fulfilled as a musician. So I went out on a journey, created a wedding string quartet that was positioned for high-paying gigs, came up with a step-by-step process. There are really 3 steps to it. And afterwards, my group now does 150 weddings every single year, and I play music full time, and my podcast shares that process and brings on other musicians to share their journey too.
Awesome. And then next who was in the room, that was Zach.
Hey everybody, thanks Allison for having me here. I'm Zach. I run the Wisconsin Music Podcast. Basically, I interview local musicians from Wisconsin and just kind of get their origin story and what they're up to from when they started music, why they're in music, and what they're doing now. And I also interview businesses and organizations that are music based as well that are in Wisconsin. So it's all Wisconsin based music information for anybody out there that wants to listen.
Awesome. Yes. And I think I was one of your early guests, and I really appreciate that. And actually, that's also true for Craig coming up, I believe. So, Craig, you're next down the line here. And go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right. I'm Craig Hurst, and my podcast is The Musical Universe of Professor Hurst. I am Emeritus Professor of Music from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee at Waukesha. I enjoyed a 30-plus year career in higher education. I retired from full-time teaching in 2017. And emeritus is a title they give you that, which basically means you're retired, but you're still holding on too tight. And so I still direct the symphonic band at the university when we're not experiencing a COVID pandemic. We hope to start up again in September. When I was teaching full-time at the university, the bulk of the courses that I taught outside of music ensembles were courses for non-music majors: music appreciation, jazz history and appreciation, history of rock and roll, world music, jazz and film, and so on. So my podcast came about as a result of the last 2, 3, maybe 4 years of my full-time teaching career. I taught online some courses, and I bought this real snarky Audio Technica microphone that plugged right into my USB port. I was sitting here at my computer about a year ago, saw that poor microphone sitting there gathering dust, and I thought, what a shame to waste it. And not too long after that, one of my colleagues contacted me, and he says, Doc, he says, I'm getting bored with what I'm listening to. Do you have any suggestions for any new artists or new music that I might consider? Bada bing, bada boom, the light bulb went on, and I started seeking out purposefully lesser known artists in all kinds of genres, jazz, blues, R&B, I just signed on the new Allman Betts Band, which is the DNA of the Allman Brothers Band. I'm interviewing them in a few weeks, but I've talked to artists from LA, Chicago, Memphis, Nashville, New York, Dallas, and even a couple of places in Italy. So it's been personally gratifying to talk to other people about music, but my purpose is to educate because I am an educator, lifelong learner. And so I do interviews on my podcast, and I also have a weekly, my Discovery Composer of the Week. I focus not just on national level musicians, but I also focus on Milwaukee area people as well, simply because I believe I should help promote music right here in my own backyard. And I live in Waukesha. So Milwaukee's in my backyard, I guess you might say. And I also find that it's important like Yogi Berra used to say, if you don't go to other people's funerals, they won't come to yours. So it's sort of like, I feel like if I support other musicians and people in music in the area, maybe that'll come back to me as well, because I'm still an active performing musician. So anyway,
Thanks, Greg.
I'll shut up now, because just like a college professor, you asked me what time it is and I gave you the history of the clock.
Thank you, Craig. Good to hear from you. And Bree, tell us about where you're from and what you do.
Okay, so I'm from Southern California. I actually have 3 podcasts, so I'll try to keep this brief, but they're all very different. The first one was actually how I started my business. As a musician, I wanted to promote other female artists. And so it started as an online radio station called Women of Substance. It became a podcast in 2014 as I saw that that was kind of the medium that was growing more than online radio. And we're still running today. So we are on episode, 1250 or some crazy number. We're a 3-day-a-week podcast. We play music by artists. So we are not an interview show. We play music by every kind of genre. And, the reason for what we do is similar to what Craig said. We want to expose more people to amazing music by indie artists, especially female artists, giving them a elevated platform so people can learn that like music that's made by indie artists is at least as good, if not sometimes better than label artists. So that is that show. And I've had that show for so long. I think I made 1,000 of the episodes myself. And then I finally brought someone else in to be the host of it and run it for me. And I still choose the music for it. But in 2015, I launched the Female Entrepreneur Musician podcast because, again, I wanted to serve those people that had come to me through Women of Substance that needed more help in the marketing and business side of music. And so I started that show specifically to help female artists. We feature a lot of female artists in our interviews. Maybe specific things that females have to deal with. And I actually just saw that there was one of those kind of listicle blog posts that said, the top 60 music business podcasts, and we were number 19. So that was really great. I think maybe because we've been around so long. And then in 2020, I started my Profitable Musician podcast, which is now the name of our business and kind of our umbrella brand. Because I've always been all about how can musicians make more money. So like what Jared's doing, but really across the board, covering everything that you can do as a musician to open up different income streams for yourself. So that's what that show is about.
All right, thanks, Bree. And I'll give a shout out here to Vinny while we're at it. You want to just tell us quickly about what you do?
I wasn't expecting to talk, but okay, there I just unmuted myself. My name is Vinny Marini. I am the host and of Music on the Couch. Bree has been on my show back a number of years ago.
Oh my gosh, I'm like, I totally recognize that name. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. I'm on episode 576. Doesn't count the show that wasn't on this past Monday, but that's a whole nother world that I'm dealing with. But my whole show is The theme of my show is musicians you should know. I started with all sorts of independent musicians. I shifted, and my show pretty much is blues, roots, Americana now. It's all interview based. I interview 3 or 4 musicians every show, and it's about 3 hours every Monday. And all of the shows are archived on my web page, Music on the Couch. And I actually speak a lot better than this when I'm doing my show.
Awesome. Thank you, Vinny. And good to see you here. And real fast, I love podcasts. I have been obsessed with podcasts for the last like 5 to 10 years. And, and I have to tell you, Craig, the reason I met Vinny is actually through you and your podcast, because you had me on, and one of your first musicians heard me on there, and he said, "Hey, I'd like to get involved with Wisconsin Music Ventures." So he has been. Alex and Alex Smith tours with Biscuit Miller in the Mix, who's managed by Paul Benjamin, who runs this big blues festival out in Maine that I was just at, where I met Vinny. So it's all very connected here. The world is small, and yeah. So there you go. There you have it, all through podcasting. So now the next question I have, and I'll probably just go in the same order for right now, unless there's reason to mix it up. But if you can give me 2 to 3 minutes on, when you started your podcast, why and how if at all has COVID affected you in what you do with your podcast more specifically? And we can start with Jared.
So that's an interesting question for me, because I started it halfway through COVID. So I would actually say that COVID helped me start it. I had the time, and I also had a need to kind of find my voice, because as I'm teaching all these musicians these different concepts, and actually I have one of my students here, hey Mike, as I'm teaching all these concepts, I needed a way to kind of solidify my voice and solidify my framework. And so one of my mentors, his name is Russell Brunson, he had this whole thing of, you can find your voice through publishing. And if you like to speak, start a podcast. If you like to write, start a blog. If you like to appear on camera, start a video blog on YouTube. And so for me, I wanted to find my voice, and this was how I chose to do it.
Awesome. And I'll probably ask this of all of you. Maybe you can just address it in this little spiel right here. Do you do any in studio sort of talking, or is it all Zoom based or phone based?
Oh, so I actually mainly record my podcast on the way to and from gigs. So I have my phone and a Shure MV88 microphone that I just plug into the bottom, and it's studio quality recording.
Smart. Multitasking. I like that. All right, Zach, how would you answer that? Do you want me to repeat?
Kind of like with Jared, mine started in September of 2020, so it was after after COVID hit us. Basically, I wanted to help musicians like everybody else get more recognition. So I wanted to know, how can I help them? And I thought podcast would be a good way to introduce musicians that aren't as well known. So I try to search out really good musicians in Wisconsin that maybe don't have the popularity that some of the upper echelon musicians in Wisconsin have. So basically, my voice is their voice. It's kind of like a soapbox when they come on the show, and they can talk about what's happening during the pandemic, before and after, and during, and what their plans are once they can start playing out live again. What recordings, how did they do a recording during the pandemic? All things kind of like what happens before, during, and after a pandemic is kind of like what the focus has been right now. And hopefully we can get away from the pandemic in the next 6 months or so. We can get back to live music and start going out and interviewing them in real life, instead of being on a Zoom, which is what I do with all my podcasts, is over Zoom. Hopefully that answered your question.
Um,
You're
And
hopefully
you-
you're muted.
oh, I'm sorry.
You started yours I swear I know how to use Zoom. And you started yours right after COVID as well, right? Right after COVID kicked in, Zach, right?
Yeah, September 2020 is when mine
Yeah.
started.
Okay. Yeah. And then Craig, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say COVID is the whole reason I started a podcast. I had my last rehearsal on March 13th of 2020, and basically no rehearsals, no gigs. My chops are in great shape, but the only audience I have is my tuner and my metronome. And so I still needed to and wanted to do something that was creative and productive and made some sort of contribution. So that's why I started the podcast in the first place. I am hosted on Anchor, and Anchor provides an excellent, for me, format to record my segments. All my interviews are recorded, pre-recorded on Zoom, and it just all plugs right in and fits together. All the editing, everything is all slick on that one site. And so that's what's worked for me. COVID has actually been very beneficial. So many musicians all around the country are out of work because of COVID. So they've got time to talk. And so I've had a wonder, I've got guests basically booked that I'll have shows for almost up through the end of the calendar year.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, way to take advantage of this time. So very smart. And Bree, I know you're probably a little bit different. You're the oddball here.
I am, yeah, because obviously I started my female entrepreneur musician in 2015. But interestingly, I was on hiatus from that show. I had kind of gotten burnt out. I had done that show every week from April 2015 to sometime in 2018. I think like September, and maybe it was 2019, but I had taken a break. So I had taken a break from that show for almost a year. And so COVID actually reinvigorated me. I'm like, I need to bring this show back. It was actually hitting the 5-year anniversary of the show in April 2020. So I was like, this is a perfect time to bring this back. I have so much to say to help musicians. You know, they need help, they need encouragement. So I brought the show back in April, and I started doing a lot of things about alternative income sources to just help them. You know, here's how you can get session work online. Here's how you can do online shows. Here's how we can, think about money differently so you're not stressed, mindset stuff, all the stuff that I thought that they really needed. And in the process of doing that, I was like, I really want to help musicians in this way, but actually the show was never really meant for this. It was more to be inspirational through interviews of female artists and to really talk to females specifically. So I was like, okay, I want to keep doing this, but I don't want to change this particular show. So that's what made me decide to create the Profitable Musician Show. As I had a Profitable Musician Summit 2 years in a row, 2018 and 2019. And so I'm like, I'll just continue this theme. I'll make this like my entire brand. And my mission is to help musicians continue to make money during COVID and beyond. And so I launched that show in November. And so it's great because that's been the mission of that show now. And I can still do some of that content on the female entrepreneur musician and especially focus on females. But I can also talk about, different things that are related more to what they have issues with, like, feeling too old for the business or just mindset issues around different things, especially as females. So that's kind of how COVID affected what I do. As far as how do I record, I have always recorded on Zoom. I think even before Zoom existed in 2015, I was using like Skype with like Pamela or something. And then once Zoom came along, I'm like, oh, this is so much better. So I started using Zoom probably in 2016. And I've always done my interviews that way. And I do all my solo episodes just sitting here in front of my computer and recording.
Follow-up question for you, Bree. Did Zoom ever get weird and crash for you once everyone started using it? Because the whole world started using Zoom, all at once, suddenly. And I know there were some issues with that. Did that ever cause a problem for you when you were podcasting?
It didn't. I had a really good connection because by that time I lived back in LA. And so the connection was everything. And I had my kids at home doing school, and my husband was at home. He's a professor. He was teaching from home, so we all managed to do all of that at the same time, which is kind of amazing considering. So no, I didn't. In fact, I even, crazy COVID, like everybody's stuff was canceled. We all decided to get in the car and drive across the country last summer. Our family has a cabin in Maine, and I got got a microphone and everything on Amazon and had it sent there, and a desktop and all that stuff. And I got my setup over there, and I actually continued to podcast and like launched my other show from where I was in Maine. So COVID didn't stop me. It really pushed my mission of like, I need to get this message out here. And even if I have to do it in a cabin in the woods, it's going to get out there.
Nice. I like that. And, the next question I have, you can take your time to think about it. Whoever has an answer can jump in first. So just kind of popcorn style here. And Vinny, if you want to jump in on this one too, go right ahead. So, the reason we started these industry talks around almost this time last year, this is the 10th one, we do these monthly, is because we wanted to have a way for musicians to kind of stay in the loop about all the changes that were happening throughout this time for them. Kind of similar, not dissimilar to what you were just talking about, Bree. And so what are some of the observations you've made from the guests that you've had on your show about how they've been managing and how they've been, that crazy pivot word that we keep overhearing and, obsessing about. But what are some of the things that you've seen from the guests? Some of the good, some of the bad, some of the crazy. Go ahead.
Okay. Musicians are very creative people. The end.
Of the musicians that I've talked to, a lot of them have gotten back into focusing on their art instead of trying to promote themselves. They're more getting songs together or whatever they're creating. That's basically what the majority of my guests have done so far, is just worked on themselves as artists.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a different take on that, because a lot of the musicians, yes, they've been creating music, but they've been working harder at promoting themselves. They're learning how to use social media more to keep in touch with their fans. And that's why, again, all the streaming on Facebook started because people wanted to share their music. I'm audio only. I've been audio only since 2010. When COVID hit, everybody said, well, why aren't you going to do video like everybody else is doing? And my response has always been, because I want to make sure that people are listening to the words and not looking at the background and trying to figure out what's behind that person and what is that piece of artwork and stuff, like I'm doing with all of you right now, for the most part. Bree, I was sort of feeling a little burned out myself, but I truly feel that this has been the most important year I have had music on the couch, because I say it more times than I can say it. And the people who listen to my show constantly are probably tired of it. But my routine is, you go to a show, you walk up to the stage, you drop your $20 in the can, you walk away with your CD. You can't do that right now. You got to get on your computer. You got to type in the URL. You got to get your credit card out. It's going to take you 10 more minutes, but you're going to do 100% more for the artist. And that's where I truly, and I get every time I say it, I get chills, because I really feel like that's where I'm at. And this is where I'm supposed to be right now, doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Vinny, when people ask me why I do only audio, I tell them it's because I have a face for radio. And but when I said musicians are creative, it's the very thing you're talking about. The creative ways they have found to still connect with an audience, maybe make a few bucks. One artist I interviewed from Canada, Harp Dog Brown, has a series on his webpage called In the Doghouse. Yep. And he has guests, they play music or pre-record stuff they've done. And then there's a tip jar.
Yep.
that you could just click on and send him some bucks, to help. Uh, other artists have all got different kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Some of, so yeah, that's what I meant by they're creative.
Yeah. I mean, I had one guest, and his name is escaping me right now, but his band was in 11 different time zones and they recorded an album. They worked on it. And the other thing that we've had a lot of conversations with is that 10 years ago, that would have been so much more difficult to do what they're doing today. It would have taken 12 hours to download a 3-minute, audio file. Today, it's instantaneous. Everybody can do things. And thank God for that. And thank God that it's given these musicians the opportunity to do what they're doing. Because when the pandemic started, I was talking to musicians and they'd have songs on their album and the song titles would sound like something that had something to do with the pandemic, but the songs had been written 6-8 months ago. Then I'm starting to talk to people who had written songs about the pandemic, and now they've recorded during the pandemic in studios where they've never seen people, and they're taking advantage of this by going out to people that they couldn't normally afford to bring into a studio and saying, hey, can you record at home? And if you can record at home, I'd love you to be part of my album. So I think the technology today has been so much more beneficial to our musicians.
Yeah, I think based upon what someone said before about pushing people out of their comfort zone and doing things they didn't do with social media and stuff, for my group, I have a lot of older artists and they are very held back by tech. And this kind of pushed them like, yes, now you've got to figure out how to do Facebook Live. You've got to learn how to, get your lighting good, how to get your sound right. And they weren't doing it before because they could just fall back on live gigs and just kind of put that in the like, I'll get to that later area, or like, this stresses me out, I don't know how to do it kind of thing. So that was what we focused on in my academy, is to just, get them past these hurdles. Like, here's a little mini course on how you can set up your live stream. And that's what I was doing also with like getting them online session work or anything they could do online. How can you take your at-home students that you're seeing on a regular basis and get them online, because you can't have them in your studio. And a lot of people really that did well embraced that, and a lot of people in my community did that because they and I think that they're all better for it, because they were being held back by those things that scared them or were out of their comfort zone before.
Yeah, something Vinny said that hit home. If we had had COVID 10 years ago, we would have been totally screwed.
Yeah,
for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I was thinking that all the time, for sure.
Yeah. With my audience typically doesn't write original songs or do Facebook Lives because they are typically cover musicians. I noticed two big things about them. The first was they all had to get really good at rescheduling. So we have done a lot of talks about contracts and contract addendums and how to automate that kind of administrative work. But the second thing I noticed is a lot of the musicians I work with really are investing in themselves to learn the music business too, which kind of echoes what I've already heard. But what does it look like to actually market yourself and have a sales process to sell gigs? Or in some cases, like, what does email marketing look like?
I had Chris Gill on my show 2 weeks ago, and he talked about, learning how to do some engineering. And I've had guests who have learned how to produce music because they just felt like, okay, I've got to learn how to do these things. These are things that I can continue to do. And again, my musicians are from around the world. I talk to people from England. I ask them to wake up at either 2 o'clock in the morning or 4:30 in the morning to talk to me, because I am 100% live. I refuse to do recorded interviews. I did a few in the beginning, and I always felt off when I did recorded interviews. For me, it just works better live. I like the mess ups. I like that part of thing. That's part of what that's part of, this whole medium that we do. Sometimes I listen to some interviews and everything is so perfect, and I know that it's been cut into 10 million pieces and put back together again. Nothing wrong with it, but for me, it just doesn't work. So, if you're in England, you want to come on my show, You've got your choice: 9 o'clock, which is 2 a.m., or 11:15, which is 4:15 in the morning. So, but yeah, it's a crazy world right now.
That's amazing. Yeah, really great thoughts, everyone. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to kind of take a little turn here, and I'd like to ask you, and I think I'll do this another popcorn style way, so just jump in when you have the answer. What is one of your favorite questions to ask your guests, and why? Jump in whenever you.
Well, I think we talked about this on Facebook. Every guest on my show gets asked the same two questions in the beginning: where were you born and raised? And then when you were crawling around on the floor in your parents' home, what was the music that they were playing? And then we work from there.
Yeah, I like that.
I always ask all of my singer-songwriters and composers, arrangers, which is most everybody. I have a few people who are just players, but I ask every one of them about their creative process. Do they start with a melodic line, a set of chord changes, a rhythmic idea, or just do they merely try to create a mood or some other cognitive picture musically? And then I also ask each and every one of them if they keep a sketchbook of musical ideas. Of course, technology being what it is, most everyone, if they have a melodic idea, they'll just sing it into their phone or keep recordings. But a guy that I interviewed whose show went public yesterday, his name is Miles Travitz, he's down in the Raleigh-Durham area, actually keeps handwritten sketchbooks. And he showed me the huge Tupperware container he has of all of his sketchbooks of ideas. He also writes, believe it or not, he writes music longhand, because his composition professor at East Carolina State University, where he got his degree, insisted his students write music, not use the computer. Well, and that's interesting coming from him, because Miles, before he became a singer-songwriter, was a serious dude in the EDM arena and did all of his music composition or creation using a computer. And that's, anyway, listen to this week's episode and you can find out all about it.
Awesome. For me, the two questions that I like to ask them is, what has been their most influential gig, either as an audience member or as a performer? And the other one is, since I'm also a recording engineer, I want to hear about their recording process, as in, do you do it at home? Do you do at the studio? Do a combination of both? Did you learn, especially with COVID, did you force yourself to learn how to record yourself to get the stuff out there that you need to get out there for yourself? So those are the two questions I enjoy asking my guests.
I always ask my artists, is there a time that you ever thought of giving up on your music career? And can you tell a story about that, and how you pushed through that and what lessons you learned? And so many of them say, like, yeah, every day I think about giving up. But it's great because you get to hear, the stories of, and some of them like, yeah, I gave it up for this long and I went and did this day job and I hated it, or something like that. So it's really interesting what they come up with.
Stealing some questions here.
I always like asking my musicians, like, tell me about the process that led to your first gig that you were like the band leader of. How did that happen? Because I know many musicians are not band leaders and maybe they are kind of interested in it, but just to hear everybody's story and process reveals like a lot about, there's no one right way to do this. And it's just really cool to hear everybody's perspective. Like, classical musicians do things very different from like cover bands.
Great answers and great questions, I should say, as your answers. And and for our own podcast, I like to ask the question every time: what is the biggest lesson you've learned being a musician along the way, and or whatever your respective field is? And so I'm going to ask that right now, and that's going to be my last question. Then I'll kind of open it up to questions from the audience, or questions of the podcasters to each other. But yeah, what is your greatest lesson that you've learned, either from your artists, from the musician guests, or just from being a podcaster since you have been doing this? And again, if you can jump in whenever you have an answer.
I guess I'll go first because I'm first in the lineup here. The biggest lesson that I've learned from my guests and from being a podcaster and everything is just get started. And I was actually chatting with my friend Andy earlier. Like, I'm not a perfectionist because I believe that perfectionism prevents people from actually starting anything. So when I started the podcast, I was feeling extremely nervous and self-conscious, like I was about to bare my soul to people and nobody's going to want to listen to it. And I had to get over that and realize it's not going to be perfect. In fact, if you listen to the first one, I didn't have a nice microphone and I was stumbling over my words and it sounded like garbage. I still leave it up because, I don't know, it's a fun piece of history, but it enabled me to get to the second one and the third one, and each one of them gets better and better, and I find my voice more.
The biggest stumbling block to moving forward or creativity is expecting perfection. We build the plane while we're flying it. And another great piece of advice, fail often and fail big, because we don't win or lose, we win or learn. And even a failure is a teaching tool or a learning tool that you can come from. And I agree with Jared. My very first podcast, I think very, poor in comparison to where I am now. And so don't be afraid to make mistakes. As a musician, the greatest lesson, to be early is to be on time. To be on time is late, and to be late is inexcusable. And on top of that, don't be an asshole, just do the job.
Yeah. I think it's interesting hearing you guys, because I've done like I said, 576 of these, and I still wonder every time I say, oh, geez, that could have been better. And I could have been better. And I'm continuing to do it. And I continue to flub my words. And, we have little things like that, but it is what it is. I really, this whole thing has just made me so happy that I've gotten into this whole industry. And the friends that I've made, the musician friends that I've made, who I care about deeply, and I work with, and I manage a musician, and I've done promotion for a lot of bands around the country. So, it's whenever I can find a way to help somebody, that's where I find it. And I just keep trying to find a better way to help.
For me, I think it was that I look back at my performing career 20 years ago and went, what can I do to help musicians that would have helped me back 20 years ago? And I thought, well, like I said earlier, to raise the notoriety of the great musicians of Wisconsin. I know there are a lot of great podcasts that do that in Wisconsin, but I just want to be another person that helps musicians out there get notarized. And yeah, and another thing is, like Vinny was saying, he does his all live, and me, I do mine pre-recorded, just because I'm not very good at oratating, and I say a lot and a lot. I don't want to have like 20 million of those in my podcast, so I want to go back and take all those things out. So learning to edit a podcast was a learning curve. It's different than doing mixing bands a little bit, but definitely strengthened my editing to the point where now I'm actually hired to edit podcasts for podcasters out there. So it's all a learning curve, and there's a lot of great things you can pull from being a podcaster, especially for musicians. So for me, it's a great learning experience. Get to learn about all the different kind of musicians out there, all different kinds of music. And like I told Allison on our interview earlier, or yesterday, or on Monday, is like, I don't want to feel old. I want to stay connected with today's music. I don't want to be connected to the stuff I grew up on, which was like when I was a kid, I grew up on WKLH, which was the rock station out of Milwaukee for the longest time. And my dad was a professional musician, and he toured and played all over the place too. So I just want to stay connected with all the great musicians that are up and coming. So that's one of the great things I learned about being a podcaster.
Zach, if I had to take all the ums out of my podcast, 3 hours would be down to about an hour and 20 minutes. Okay. So ain't doing it, dude.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because I know I have my verbal tics or whatever, but I did go through a period where I had a Facebook Live show, and I just went ahead and put that up on the podcast every week because heck, it was much easier, and I could kill two birds with one stone. And it got me over a lot of my, concerns about what I was saying, or how it took me a second to think of what I was going to say or whatever. And I listened to other shows and I'm like, this doesn't bother me when I listen to their shows. It feels more conversational and stuff. So I definitely got over that after a while. I think the lesson I've learned from other musicians that I've had on, and it kind of applies to us as podcasters as well, is that for most things, there is a corner of the market for them. So I've interviewed people that have been like super niche, that there are people that have, they perform just for, Comic-Con or something like that, and you think, oh my gosh, is there really a niche for that? And there is. You just need to know who your people are. And as we've all talked about today, like every band that you guys have mentioned, I've never heard of them, but like they have a following. So you just need to find your 1,000 true fans. And it's the same with podcasters. I never knew in 2015 that my show would still be going today and that there would be, this many downloads and all that stuff. And I'm not a huge show, but it's enough that, it sustains my business and it's helping a lot of people. So you never know where you're going to go once you start. And there is a place for everyone. And I think that's good, because with COVID, I think that the landscape is a lot more crowded than it used to be. And so we just need to do what we do well in order to stand out.
All right, very well said. Great advice here, and lots of great thoughts in general. At this point, if you have questions from the audience, you can kind of just jump in and ask them, and or if the panelists have questions for each other, go ahead and jump in. If needed, I can always come up with more questions myself. Anyone, audience?
This is kind of a.
Go ahead.
I have a question.
Go ahead, John.
My name's John. I'm part of Hallow Tribe, a new band out of Milwaukee. Oh, I think I'm lagging. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. My internet's not great. Sorry about that. I'm John. I'm from a new band out of Milwaukee called Hallow Tribe. And I dabble in home recording, but one thing I've always struggled with is vocal EQing. And I know podcasting is different. It's a different animal, but I'm just curious from all the podcasters on here, do you have kind of a standard? Do you find your own voice? You've got a frequency range that you stick with? Do you EQ much of the of your guests, or do you not worry about it?
I don't do any of it. It's all straight. My guests all call into a number for my switchboard at Blog Talk Radio, and it's all controlled there. I mean, I can bring up a little volume and whatnot, but there's no EQ, and I upload all my music that I'm playing for each episode to the server in New York, so it plays directly from the server. So again, I don't have any control over that.
I feel like Zach might, if anyone, he might play around with things the most.
Yeah. So I just pulled up my DAW just to see what I do on my vocal mic. I have an EQ, I have a compressor, I have a breath control, I have a mouth declicker, another compressor, a de-esser, and then a vocal rider, just so everything stays as smooth as possible throughout the whole recording. So there's no dips in the audio when I do podcasting for my vocal. So I do that when I look at, if I look at another one, if I look at a guest, they pretty much have the same thing, an EQ, compressor, breath control, mouth declicker, another compressor, another de-esser, and a vocal rider. So those are my main things, is a compressor, EQ, a vocal rider, and some breath control is basically what I use for podcasting.
Anyone else want to jump in on that? Or is
I
that...
don't worry about EQing.
Yeah, I even when I do my live shows from Memphis, I do 21 hours every year from the International Blues Challenge. So I have to have a mixer at that point, because I've got all my guests there in the room that I occupy. Everybody stays straight up. It's easier not to have to try to worry about every time somebody else sits down trying to adjust for every guest. I've got enough things going on because I do it by myself.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
And mine's
Yeah,
pretty.
I was gonna say, I kind of
go ahead, Bree.
decided to make a play with YouTube, and started videoing when I started my new show. And so I don't want to have to worry about EQ and stuff like that. So it's kind of, sometimes you just kind of have to make choices. If you want to like do a live show or do YouTube, and it's not as easy to make it like as perfectly EQ'd, or you're using Zoom or whatever, you just kind of have to make choices of like, well, I'd rather do the video and not be a perfectionist than not do the video.
This is my mic, a C1U. It's the same mic I use for my show. It plugs right into my computer. Easy peasy, not a problem.
Yeah.
Good
and
questions. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, just because of being a recording engineer, I guess I try to be a little bit more, I guess just to make, to my ears, make it sound a little bit better. I guess that's what I want to say.
I certainly, if I had those ears, I'd probably play around a little bit more myself.
Good questions. And then AJ from Alii's new band in the Milwaukee area said, are there any key lessons or things you've learned from your podcasting experience that you think would be helpful for new musicians specifically? Anyone want to jump in there?
I'll jump in on that. So it's kind of related to what I teach at with all the gigging stuff that I work with my musicians on, is that for me, my podcast is part of my strategy. As a new musician, my motivations were to be a professional symphony conductor and be artistically fulfilled, but also to make a living at it. So there is a monetary component, and I know Bree's podcast, the profitable musician and all that. We have to make a living from our art at some point. We can't just give away things for free all the time, because that's how we go broke. And so the podcast is a free medium. I don't know of many paid podcasts. So having the podcast as part of a strategy that leads down the funnel into something that's paid has been very helpful. And so with like music, whatever kind of music you're trying to accomplish, if you're doing free performances and stuff, have some way of monetizing that you can then connect from your current platform. Like if you do live streams all the time, then link to maybe your merch or a way to book you for some sort of private event, something like that.
Tip jar.
Yeah, I agree on that note too, not just monetizing, but also staying connected with people that are listening. So some way for them to opt in to a newsletter, or, so you can make sure that you continue to connect with them, because with podcasts, they can subscribe, but you don't know if they're listening every week, and that they just, maybe forgot about you or just stopped listening to podcasts. But you then can have other ways to connect with them. So making sure they connect with you on social media, making sure they connect with you on your email list, and continuing to nurture them and provide value. And as Jared said, like eventually being able to monetize that. But the first step to that is making sure that you stay connected with them.
For musicians, again, the lessons that you have to know is, just as we've continued to say, you need a Facebook page. You need a website. So many bands out there today don't even have websites. They think that their Facebook page is was all, as much as they need, or their Instagram and Facebook. You need a website. You need to be able to, put up information that's not going to be on your Facebook page, or is going to get lost on your Facebook page. And the only other thing I can say is, again, especially for managing bands, get there a half hour before you think you should get there. Okay? At least a half hour before you think you should get there. Not when you think you should. A half hour beforehand on every gig. Go up, make sure you talk to every bartender, the manager, the waitresses, say hello to them. If you've got it, I'd give every manager of every club a CD and a t-shirt when you walk in. These are your friends. These are the people that are going to book you again. These are the people that are going to, tell their friends and their other club owners, hey, I got this really cool band that I had in the last week. You should check them out. So It's about marketing. It's all about marketing.
Yeah, really good thoughts. Great. Any other comments on that? Go ahead, Zach.
I was just going to say, exactly what Vinny said, networking and just knowing everybody in your circle and everybody that's attached to that circle. You just got to keep reaching out, and it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years.
Mhm.
And, I personally am a big advocate for, remembering who has helped you and acknowledging them and, saying thank you along the way. And if someone made you a really good connection or, someone did something really excellent that really got you somewhere, thank them and go out of your way to do so, because odds are they may help you even more someday. And that's just a little piece of advice I'd like to personally pass along.
Well,
Yes.
I would echo what Allison just said. When I was getting ready or going through my undergraduate school, my secondary ed methods teacher told me, as a band director, which is what I was training, says the person that you need to be the best friends with in the school, two people, the head custodian and the principal secretary. And you need to make sure that you let them know how you value them. You need to buy the head custodian a cup of coffee or take the principal secretary to lunch or something like that, because, and I've carried that forward in everything that I do. I develop relationships with people, and I don't care what they do, whether they're a window washer or pick up the garbage or what, but I make sure and tell them thank you and I appreciate what you do, because you never know how that's going to come back to help you. You also don't know who might be watching you, and people will judge you not on who you are, but how you treat other people.
It's so true. I do a preview shows for the International Blues Challenge beforehand. And one of the stories I tell all the time is I tell people, when you go to Memphis, bring more business cards than you think you need and bring more CDs. And if you come home with one of your own CDs in your pocket, you failed. And the guy that's over there on the corner outside of Sullivan's on Beale Street, and he's real drunk and his jeans are torn, slip a CD in his pocket because he books the biggest blues festival in the world. It's true. I've been there 11 years. It's true. It happens. So
That's funny. I love it. Lots of great advice here. And I think, are there any last questions from anyone in the room here, in the audience, or the podcasters for each other?
We all gonna have coffee together.
Yeah.
And I definitely like to connect everyone after these. So
Florida here, so it'll be a little tough for me. But again, you mentioned it early. We met in Maine at North Atlantic Blues Festival. I went up there to just hang out. Paul had invited me. We were just going to hang out. I had a couple of musicians. I knew every musician on stage that weekend, but the most important person I met that whole weekend was you, as far as I'm concerned. It's just, I can already feel there's a great connection. It's knowing you is going to be helpful to me somewhere down the line. And I hope I can be the same for you.
Absolutely. Very quickly, that has been evident. So thank you, Vinny. And I'm grateful you stopped in for this. Very much so. I have one last closing question. Then, with all that being said, is what is your closing tagline? Do you have a closing tagline for your podcast? And if so, what is it?
Have a great day.
Depends on, on my Friday showcase, I say see you on Monday, and on Monday I say see you on Friday.
I say go out and I can't talk. Go out and make great music, connect with your audience, and grow your business.
Be happy, be safe, share love and not hate, and share the blues like Jimmy Buffett's or whoever my guest is, and then their last song. And the last song closes us out of the show.
And I have the one that I do and the one that I want to do. So the one that I do right now is thanks for listening to the Gigging Musician podcast. See you on the next episode. But what I want to start doing, so thanks for the inspiration, is may all your gigs be spectacular.
Do it. Do
Yep.
it. It's
Yeah.
perfect.
So,
Perfect. I mean, you could tag that on. You could tag that on to what you say right now.
That's true.
You know, and make it just the whole thing, because both of those things are important for your guests. So I would just tag that on and be that's the last thing you say. So
Yeah.
Awesome. Great
That
advice.
inspires me to say, go see live local music.
awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, something that ties in with your brand, and that's short and memorable. Perfect. Well, thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. It's great to have you all in one place and to have all these ideas flowing and bouncing back and forth. And I'll definitely connect to podcasters in the room here, musicians. Definitely check out their podcasts. I think most of them put them in the chat here, and if not, they were in the information on the event anyways. So you have that. So be sure to follow up, listen to them. Connect with them, follow, give them great ratings. We always want that, right? And and hopefully we'll be in touch. All right.
gentlemen,
Thanks
thanks.
for
Nice
having
meeting
us.
you. Bree, good seeing you again. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Allison. This was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Appreciate you.
Have a good one. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.